Testing, all right. Okay, well, thank you everybody for showing up. It's quite nice to come to a place on the opposite side of the world and have so many people interested in these subjects about video games. I like to know who I'm talking to, especially for something like today where I'm going to be doing some demos that are sort of less scripted, where I can choose what to talk about. So who here is currently a student? A lot, okay. Who is recently a student and is now working at a game company or starting their own game company? Smaller, okay. Who is a video game veteran kind of a person, has been working for a number of years? Yeah, who has all the scars? Yeah, okay, cool. That helps me, thank you. So the structure of this talk is that we actually collected some weeks ago some questions from people, and then I built the talk around the answers to those questions. But before we get to the questions, I want to do an introduction to set some context and give some concrete examples to draw upon later. The thing that I've seen when I've visited various parts of Asia, there's, every place is different, but there's a general trend that makes it a little bit different from some place like the USA right now. And around here, there are a lot of big game companies, right? As there are anywhere. But here, the big game companies seem to have the vast majority of the success. They have the most reputation. Like, when people are independent game developers around here, they think of themselves as maybe not totally real in the way that we're not as serious as the big companies are, or something like that. And again, I'm not trying to say anything too specific about any specific person. It's just a general pattern. So there are people doing independent development, but I think these games tend to be smaller games. They tend to be a little bit less successful than they are in the West. And there's always this question of why that is, or when are we right at the cusp of those games being a lot more successful? I think that's true. I think, I've been doing independent development for a long time now. In the way that I'm currently doing it, I've been doing it since 2004, but then I was doing related things before that. And I've seen the industry change a lot. And it feels like around Asia that a change like that can happen very soon. So the first game that I'm well known for, Braid, was made starting in the end of 2004, the beginning of 2005. And at that time, the games industry in the USA was very different than it is today, right? Back then, there were people who were making independent games. There were actually a lot of them, but they all weren't really real games. They weren't games that you cared about very much. They looked bad, they played badly. They weren't really that big of a commercial concern. But today, we're on the other end of a very large transition where independent games are, they're respected. Many people would rather work at an independent game company than a large game company. And some independent games have even gone on to be the biggest financial successes, right? So games like Minecraft, I almost said StarCraft, that's not an independent game. The other craft, Minecraft, was, it was just a guy making a game in his room in the start. So I've seen this transition happen. And so one of the things that I want to say today is that if you're interested in being an independent developer and you feel like independent developers are like not that real or not that respected, that is a situation that can change very rapidly. And I want to make that very clear in this talk. So when it comes to the games that I've made lately, so the two big ones are Braid and The Witness, and what people see after these games have come out is a product of years of effort that looks like a lot of work went into it, feels like a lot of work went into it, but that's not that's not what these games were like for most of development. And so what I want to do is show you how each of these games looked and felt early on. And to do that, I went into the old file archives and dug out old versions of games. So right now, Braid, I started at the end of 2004 when I was on vacation. I'd been thinking for a while that I wanted to start a new independent game. And I had some ideas for it, which we'll talk about later, what exactly those were. Most people on vacation, they relax and don't work, but I just tend to get motivated. And so after maybe 4 or 5 days of just relaxing, I just got out my laptop and decided to work 8 to 10 hours a day on this brand new project that I was very excited about. And after about 2 weeks, both through the end of that vacation and then a little bit when I got back home, I just got the game to a point where it was playable, and I sent it to my friends saying like, hey, check this out, isn't this cool? And I'm gonna show you what I sent my friends in January 2005. It had this story bit that's just like on a screen, and then you could play. And it looks like this. There's this cheesy half-rent Mario guy who's literally got a few frames of graphics that I didn't even try that hard to draw in Photoshop. It looks bad, like the wall there in the background defining the extents of the level is dark. It's so dark that it even gets drowned out by these lights. But when you're looking at it on a screen, it's not that much better. It's, the colors are bad, everything's bad. But that's not what I was working on, right? I was working on the game design and the ideas. And a lot of those ideas are here even in the very earliest version of the game. So here, this is level 2, and we're sort of introducing, there's these trellises in the background that you could climb on, right? There's level 3, and it's like, there's this little plant monster that comes up out of the ground. Now, an interesting thing about this early version of the game, for those of you who are familiar with the finally released game, I didn't mean to die, but this will make my point. There's no rewind yet in the game. In the original version, you had to play through a world without rewind because rewind was given to you as like a power in the next world. And my initial design idea was that was what was necessary to get players to appreciate it or something. And I eventually changed that because it seemed like a bad idea, all other things considered. But so the structure of the game is here. You go from world to world. You have a little guy at the end who talks to you. These transitions are really badly tuned. This is way too long. So you go to another world. This is a world where we introduce rewind finally, and we just have this little R in the background saying, you could hit the R key, right? There's no fast forward again like there is in the final game. And the levels start getting more real, so I kind of have to climb up and over, and this was my idea. So early in the design, I was like, well, what does rewind mean in a platformer? It means you could miss jumps and rewind back, right? So, so I started making these ridiculous challenges, and this is a really bad challenge because the controls on this game are super floaty and slippery. Yeah, like, let's just... there we go. That probably makes it. You don't actually have to land on the last platform. But I was starting to experiment with these ideas of what did rewind mean even before you had special powers. And then I'll skip ahead a bit. Actually, this is a level that ended up in the final game where there's an idea in game design, in classic platformer game design, that you don't want to have a thing called a leap of faith where you can't see. You have to drop down into an area that's maybe dangerous, but you can't see what's down there because it's not fair, because you might fall into something and die. And so one of the early pieces of rhetoric in this game was like, actually, it's fine if you're like standing there and then you have to jump down, because if you die, you just rewind, right? And then we started playing with these ideas, or I started playing with these ideas of things being immune to being rewound. So this game is actually in the final game in a very simplified form where there's just a room with one pit. It's not like a round up a ladder or anything, right? So I get the key and I take it out, right? And this was super exciting to me. Like, these days after, many, many years later, I'm used to all these ideas, but back then I was just super pumped about this. Like, wow, this is great. I want to show my friends. Like this level again is in the final game, and this level. So here we have the boss monster level, which recurs several times in Braid, and here we are, right? It's in a very low production value game. So let's be clear about something, right? If you're at an event like this one, okay, and there's like a showcase sometime during the day when people show their games, and you see a game that looks like this, most people are going to look at this and say, that game's terrible. Like, I'm not even going to play, right? But this is what things look like in the beginning, right? Like, this game went on to become a well-respected and highly financially successful independent game, but you wouldn't know by looking at it, right? And that's the thing. So just one more, this was in there. I have a little Donkey Kong at the top, which for copyright violation reasons, he doesn't look like that in the final game. But this level, the basic idea of it is in the final game. It's been simplified. So back here, there's like maybe one more level to go up or something than there was. This is in the final game. Anyway, so I'll show you then. The game started, that was my very first thing that I did. So it was like, just scribble some bitmaps. They're super ugly, whatever, it doesn't matter. The game started looking slightly better later on. Like, this is a few months later. I actually had to finish up another project. So this isn't a few months of work later. I don't know how much it is. Maybe 5 or 6 more weeks. And as you can see now, it looks highly professional. This still looks like a game that's terrible, right? But it has even more of the gameplay that's even closer to the final game. So, and then, for people who aren't familiar with the game, I actually meant to show this first, but I didn't think about it in time. This is what the final game. Oh, geez. I have to run the Steam client. Hold on. That's what I get for running the Steam version of the game. Is Steam starting? Come on, Steam. Oh, there we go. Start in offline mode. Thank you. I didn't want that window. All right. Okay, and so, all of that refined and worked on, you end up with something that's very nice and very pretty and has actual graphics and actual sound, right? And so again, to get back to the point of showing this demo, it's like if you're an indie who's starting out and you're looking at a game like this and you're saying, that's so far, like, I'm so far from making a well-respected thing. It's not that hard, right? That's the wrong way to say it, but but let me put it this way: just because your game looks like the ugly thing that I just showed, doesn't mean it doesn't end up in a place that's, well, I don't know. Some people still think this game is ugly and have a lot of bad things to say about it, but enough people think that it's good. Okay. So let's do the same thing for The Witness. Here. It's sort of, The Witness is a big game with a lot of stuff in it, and I wanted to show the different scenes pretty fast. So to do that, I'm going to show the trailer that we did. My goal is not to advertise the game to you. I just want to, uh-oh, the video's not playing. Oh, wait, no, sorry. I clicked the wrong thing. Here we go. So again, what you're seeing here is the final product of us working on the game for a long time, and that shows off the ideas as best we can, right? There's these simple panels that you solve in the world. There's different kinds of puzzles. And then we start interplaying those with the environment in different ways. And that part of the game is about exploring the world and encountering these puzzles in ways that are surprising and that keeps changing up the basic idea of what you think that you're doing long enough that you can have a very long experience and it doesn't feel repetitive or tedious. So, this game, there's various levels of completion that you can have. There's various levels of completion that you can have, probably between 35 and 100 hours, depending on how completionist you are. That's how much stuff you find to do in the game, right? And there's a structure to it, right? So there's, you turn on these lasers, and that's how you measure your progress through the game. And when you go into a new area, you see a laser, and like, oh, that's a thing that I need to go activate, right? So this game was a lot of work, right? We worked on it for a long time. I'm very happy with the result. It's the best thing that I've ever worked on. Today, let me show you what it was like in the beginning. This version of the game that I'm going to run is from. We have to actually switch mics because I need to mouse and keyboard, and I can't do that and hold a microphone at the same time. So we're switching setups here. Is that okay? Can you hear me? Okay, good. So this version of the game it's not the exact build, but it's approximately the build that we took to Penny Arcade Expo in 2010, and after we'd been working on it for about 1 year. And so as you're going to see, similar to the version of Braid that I showed, it's really ugly. But it has a lot of the ideas of the final game, right? The idea that we're starting in a dark tunnel. We see a simple panel that that's not hard to solve, that starts to wordlessly teach us the mechanics, right? I can look around, I can do puzzles, and from here, I think I'm going to fly around and just show and talk about some various random things. Well, I've got cheats in this version of the game, fortunately. So again, there's this yard that sort of keeps you penned in until you figure out the basics of how to interact with the panels and follow the cables and so forth. That was all in this initial version, including the idea that oh, I'm following back panels from this force field thing, or following cables. And this one, oh, it goes over the house, so I have to do a little bit of searching to find it and end up somewhere. That's actually a harder thing to find in the final game, but the idea is there. You come out of here, I'm flying right now, which you're not able to do in the actual game. So you come out here and you see this room, and you're like, oh, what's in here? And there's a vault thing through the window, and there's this puzzle, and you're like, what the puzzles I've done till this second were very simple. What the hell is this, right? If I cheat the puzzle for a second, you can come in here, and you can't see this very well. Maybe you can barely see that, but this is not tuned, but there's a little movie canister in here that I actually pick up and put in my inventory. This version of the game had inventory, which the final game does not have, right? All right, so we have various things powered by switches and buttons, which is also something that you don't see in the final game. So I could turn the windmill on and off, and that'll power this thing eventually, once it goes up to full speed. And yeah. And then this is a movie player, and I can go there and actually put my canister in there and play a movie. So I had these movies in the game early on. Not all of them, not the ones that were final, but enough of them, right? That's a significant bit of programming to get a movie player to play successfully while you walk around a 3D world. Other ideas that were in the game very early on, this hedge maze puzzles that sort of interact with the panels that you trace. I believe these are the exact puzzle designs. They look right to me as what we shipped in the final game. There are various other ways that the puzzles interact with the idea of the world, so ideas of light and shadow and reflection and stuff. Here was this is a really dark cave that's hard for me to find my way through. Come on. There we go, okay. This was just a very early mock-up, what if there was a puzzle where you turn lights on and off and then different things become visible on the wall? This wouldn't be some cubes, it would be a fresco or a very fancy painting on the wall, and you could interpret it differently. And in this build of the game, we couldn't get lighting to work well enough for that to work. Like you see, the red isn't totally gone when I turn off that light. And if I turn this one off, you like see all the colors. So this was a technically difficult and annoying thing to accomplish. There's this idea in the game already of opening things out. Once you make progress into a place that's hard to get to, you can open back out to the main world, and that gives you a feeling of progress, and it makes it easier to get back there later if I wanted to do that color puzzle. This idea of the lasers is still here. Let's find a laser. So here's one. It's a very mocked up idea, but if I come up here and cheat it, it goes, and like normally you would have to do all these puzzles in a row to activate this laser and get it to point at the mountain. And actually it doesn't point at the mountain right now. It points like at a random building, which is not as cool, right? Just to show you how crazy this early version is in terms of having the ideas from the later game. Here's a thing which I called the exit hall for a while, which is a little bit of a spoiler, but there's a thing in The Witness where there's a place that you don't know about unless you secretly discover it, and it's got like some live action video things, and like I shot that. Like we did this video trick in the final game that you need to do by matching perspectives between the real world and the game world, and here this was a friend of mine who was at my house, and I just sort of walked with a camera like to the side, and it's bouncing up and down, but the point was to get the thing in the game, and make it kind of work, right? So this is all crappy, it's all bad, but that's what things look like in the beginning. Oh, so what else was there? Don't want to do too big of a spoiler for people who haven't played the game in May, but there's these black obelisks here. There's actually only one, but that and everything related to that is also in the game in this early version after just 1 year. Let me show you a few things that didn't make it into the final game because they were revised out. You've actually already seen a little bit of it. The fact that there are levers that you activate and buttons, those were streamlined out. Sorry, I'm having trouble with I'm on a sloped surface, so if I let go of the mouse, it does that. These were put in the game originally because, hey, it's an adventure game. In adventure games, you have switches and buttons because that's what's cool. But then eventually I realized that it's actually better to streamline and focus everything on the panels. And so in the final game, you would activate this door with a panel. Another thing that didn't make it into the final game is the very concept of what's going on here. So we have this building that's the movie theater, right? That's one purpose of it. And then there's a secondary puzzle built into it, which is, if I'm going to cheat it for speed purposes, but if you walk around and around this, which is another vault building, you can sort of see out here at the edge of this platform, there's a recording. And I want to get that. Like I have the idea as a player that I want to collect all of these, but I can't get across there. But if I'm observant, I might notice that if I open this door, it's a very wide door, and it bridges the way over to that thing. So maybe if I try to run up there, I can get up the door in time. Now, spoilers for this version that nobody will ever play, you can't because the door closes faster than you could get up there. So there's this involved thing where you have to turn off the power to the windmill, and that takes a while because this thing has momentum, and there's a battery. In later versions of the game, we had a battery charge indicator that ticks down, and then you have to come over here and open the door at the right time so that when the power runs out, maybe I got it, maybe that was too soon. I'll just hit the button again if it starts to close. Oh, I got it exactly wrong. But the point is, if the power shuts out while the door is open, the door stays open, right? Which in most games would be a perfectly reasonable, interesting puzzle. It is not in the final game. The reason it is not in the final game is because it's not what the game was about. And later on in the design process, it was about cutting things and focusing and making them as interesting as possible. One more thing from this early version that informed us later. You learn about design by designing, right? So here's an area that people who have played the game might recognize. There are these puzzles, and maybe, oh, I guess you can see. So there's these very dark spots in the middle of the grid, and you want to cover them all, and you've been introduced to that before in the island, and now you have this symmetry layered on top, so you're doing both at once, right? And so forth. And then early in the design, I was trying to think about what are some ways to make it so that it's not just a bunch of puzzles in random places on the island. How do I design areas so that you feel like there's progression and that you've accomplished something? And my idea for this one was, well, you know, when you solve each of these sequences, then it'll make this ramp go up, right? And then you can go from level to level, and you very clearly see your progress up to the top. Of course, I already cheated the laser up there, but, you know. And then you eventually want to get up to the top. And you know, I don't play test games very often, but I did very early with this one because it's very experimental. And what would happen with multiple different players is they would come in here, they'd take a look at this whole area with all the ramps down, and they'd look at all these puzzles, and they're just like, ugh, this looks like work. I don't want to do all these frickin' puzzles. And so in the final game, whenever we have an area with this many puzzles, they're broken up. You have a Japanese garden kind of effect where you can't see them all at the same time. And that's not just to make you unaware of how many things there are to do, although that's one part of it. It's also to give part of your mind a visual stimulation between puzzles, because it's a way of resting. You use the analytical part of your mind, then you use an aesthetic part of your mind, right? Back and forth. Or you solve and then you explore, and then you solve and then you explore. It's to break things up. And also, of course, I mean, even if this place were not a bunch of gray slabs, if it were more beautiful, people would like it better. But you shouldn't rely on that, right? You try to make your design as good as you can. So one more thing I want to show you about this prototype is this area. This is an area that built upon the sort of black and white spots that you're introduced to in the beginning, but it starts playing with them in ways that I don't want to go through and explain, but they're ways that are not present in the final game, but that I think is a really interesting, fascinating puzzle, right? So you go down these like 3 parallel channels of different things that could be going on, like these little rotating versions of these spots. They're not in the final game. And then, wait, where's the third one? Oh, I went out too far. You know, this one, and this has colors. Multiple colors are in the final game, but the way this operates with the other 2 is not. And then I get over here, and I'm presented with this series of challenges where I have to solve all 3 of these things. And it's cool. It's a cool puzzle. It does not exist in the final game. And the reason why it doesn't is because even though this was a fascinating area by itself, and this was a cool direction to take the rules for this particular symbol type, I didn't see how to make it interoperate with the other puzzles in the game that we came up with later. It was just unclear how to make something good out of that. The last thing I want to show is how naive some of the ideas are at the beginning, or naive is not the right word, but maybe how basic they are compared to the final game. So here, you know, we have these sort of cliffs here that you go up. Why? Well, I guess because it's cool if the island has cliffs in multiple levels. I don't know. Like, this is very early on. There's this like rope bridge that goes across. So you know, you go here and then you take this bridge across to the mountain. And it's, in my mind, it was like this was going to be a really cool moment, because like a rope bridge is like a thing that's in adventure games, and that was a cool thing. So I was excited to put a rope bridge in my game. That's not in the final game. We cut it because it's not what the game is about. Here there was, the character. So the character has like a character shadow and stuff, but he's this weird buff dude with power armor, because that's what I had from a previous thing. That's the character model that I had. He like doesn't animate, and he doesn't have any textures on him. You know, again, levers, which we don't have. So, and then the idea was like, hey, again, there's a shortcut here, but it's going to be an elevator that goes up and down the mountain really fast. And I guess it doesn't feel that fast when we haven't made the environment good, but it'll be cool to like go up the mountain really fast in the final game. And like we cut that. But that was like, I mean, those are the kind of game ideas that I had when I was like 15, and here I was, 30 something, and I was still having those ideas. And it was fine though, because that's how you get started, right? That's how you start. You have to start doing things. If you're doing something new, you have to start doing things in order to figure out what's really working and what's not working, and what's really new and promising and valuable and what's not. For people who have played the game, this panel is still here, the one on top of the mountain, that's very important. Most important idea in the game was there from the very beginning. Okay, should I switch back to the other mic? This one sounds like it's got annoying noises. Okay, good stuff. So that brings us finally to the question part of the presentation. So one of the questions we got was, what is the departure point when you're making a new game? Is it some intrinsic value that you want to provide, or some concept about the world you want your players to learn? If so, does the rest happen organically around it, meaning that the game mechanics are all flexible vehicles to deliver the first value, or is it the other way around? And what I have to say about that is, I don't exactly know what is the departure point? Where does the idea come from? Because for me, I think it's been a little bit different every game, right? So the idea behind Braid was, there was this book that I really loved called Invisible Cities, and that book is about, it's a collection of a bunch of short fiction pieces that are 3 or 4 pages each, and each one just describes a different city where just reality is weirdly different in each one. So I wanted to make a game where reality was weirdly different in each world. There was another book that was inspired by Invisible Cities, made by a physicist called Alan Lightman at MIT, and he was using that format of Invisible Cities to describe different ways that reality could be in terms of the theory of relativity. So the fiction of the book is Albert Einstein, before he's figured out the theory of relativity, is thinking through all the possibilities. He's working hard at the patent office during the day, and then he goes home and falls asleep and imagines a new potential solution for the equations of reality. And what both of these books do is they take weird ideas about existence and expand them up to the scale of human beings, so that human beings are walking around and weird things are happening between them. And I wanted to do that in a video game, which was fascinating because in a game, you actually have to make the physics. You have to make the world as opposed to just talking about it, right? So I had all these ideas about what are the phenomena in quantum mechanics that might be fun. And then the first one I implemented was rewind, because one of the things about the laws of physics is that they appear to be bidirectional, and so going forward and backward in time makes sense. And as soon as I did that, I realized, wow, this is enough to make a whole game. It doesn't exactly need to be quantum mechanics anymore. So the quantum mechanics thing was a jumping off point that I left behind just for rewind. But the Invisible Cities part of the idea stayed there into the final game. With Witness, the basic idea of the game was about a surprise that I wanted the player to have. I wanted them to have a very deep and meaningful kind of surprise. But the original idea was actually a totally different game. It was a fantasy spellcasting game where you would draw shapes on the screen to cast spells. If you've played Black and White or Arx Fatalis, those games, those are pretty old games by now, so I don't know if anyone knows what those are. But then the surprise in that game was going to be, well, you start out the game and you go through a dungeon and you find a scroll and it gives you a new shape to cast fireball or whatever. And then midway through the game, you might find a very surprising way to learn new spells. And then when it came time to make the Witness, what I had learned from Braid was, well, wait, the game gets better when you realize what it's about, when you cut all the extra stuff, and when you focus. So what if I do that for this game? What if I just focus on the surprise, and then how do I get there, right? And so all these panel puzzles that are in the Witness and that make up the bulk of the gameplay now started with just this idea, I need to somehow get the player to a point where they're drawing lines. I need a reason for them to be drawing lines because they're not casting spells anymore. And how do I carefully create this situation for you to be looking for certain kinds of things? And so these were an excuse in the beginning, but of course you don't want your game to be based around a flimsy excuse. And so I started exploring the design space of these puzzles and found it to be rich and gratifying and a fully worthwhile game of its own, right? Of course, people are in the audience are like, you should have made a spellcasting game. That would have been cool. Maybe we'll make that sometime. So let me show you one other thing. So the thing I'm about to show you, it's a program I was working on toward the beginning of The Witness, and I didn't take it very far because I wanted to focus on The Witness. But I had this idea that educational games are not very good, but video games actually have a lot of potential for education. And what are some ways that you do that? So I started working on an abstract puzzle game, or at least the idea was that it would be an abstract puzzle game. I never got to the point where there were actual puzzles. Let me turn off the music. We don't need that. So the idea would be that you'd sort of learn wordlessly how to interact with things. So I might learn that I could drag this squiggly line, and then there's this circle that highlights when I mouse over it, so I could click on that, and it sort of turns these lines from passing through each other into bouncing off each other, I guess, and I can do that and undo it, and I could move this around, and that intersection point moves. That's about all there is to do in that level so far. Like I said, they're not real levels. But then I can start having more sophisticated situations where I have more choices about what to do, and I can like make different shapes. Like, oh, okay, lines crossing each other is one kind of interaction, but then I guess when the yellow lines are near each other, let me clear this out. When these are near each other, that's a different kind of interaction, and they make a squiggly line and push each other away, right? So you start to get this like set of actions, like verbs in your mind of what you're able to perform. And you know, maybe if this was just a toy, you would find some interesting things that you could do, like, you know, I can maybe make this thing bounce back and forth in there or something like that, and then move it around and sort of see what happens. But then the surprise part of this game was going to be that later in the game, you would find out that these abstract entities that you had been doing this puzzle solving on are actually physics particles, and that these are actually Feynman diagrams, and you actually learn physics by playing the puzzle game, or you know, to some part of physics, and that you got some intuition for that part of it by playing this puzzle game. This is as far as I ever took it, but it's just to show you that, you know, that's a different place that a design idea can come from, right? It's a very starting with a very high level concept of like, how do I do a physics game, and then just trying to do it, right? So some more that I'm not going to run for time purposes, but if you go search on my website for these, you could find them and download them. These are really old. These are from before Braid was finished, so like 2007. Like once I had an idea about painting in a goal-oriented way, so you had an interface. This is before we had, you know, smartphones. So it was painting with a mouse on a PC, and it was a very bad interface, but that wasn't the point. I didn't even give you good colors, which like a painting game with bad colors is, you're not ever going to paint anything that looks good. But the point was there are these different characters who run the different galleries and judge whether they want your painting to be shown or not. And they're all different little AI algorithms that want different things in the painting. And so you're doing this highly dimensional thing, this painting, and trying to make it to conform to multiple goals at the same time, right? So that was interesting. There was another game that came at it a different way. Like, as you're playing through a game, you might have different goals. Like, oh, I have to dodge these bullets and shoot these monsters. And then, oh, I have to get this health because my health is low. And usually these goals come in a sequence in time. Like first you're fighting and then you're healing. Maybe you're trying to do both at once sometimes, but we don't ever really make a sophisticated medley of these. And so my idea with this game is what happens if you design short-term gameplay goals such that you could multi-track them the way that you would a song, and they're interplaying off each other, and some of them are getting louder or quieter or fading in or out with respect to each other. The game that I'm working on now is about, well, there's a thing that you learn in game design school, which is that when you design an object in a game, you probably want it to interact well with other objects, right? So if you have like a bucket and water, the water can go in the bucket and that's how those interact. But then like if you can freeze the water, then it interacts with the bucket differently. Like you want these ways that things can be complex, right? And so usually people design some objects in a game and get them complex enough and then say, okay, ship it, right? But the goal of this game is to get so many rules together and make them interact so richly that we get a combinatoric explosion, kind of like generating critical mass for a nuclear explosion from the gameplay rules, right? And I see this as an expansion of the work that I did in Braid and Witness. So in the Witness, in those panel puzzles, a lot of work went into making sure the different puzzle types interacted with each other. And like I said, that's why I cut that one area, because it didn't interact very well with the other things. And so the question has always been on my mind, what happens if we do even more of that? Just keep turning up the loudness, right? And then another game that I was working on in 2013 that we're going to release eventually, but I don't want to show anything about, is an idea about a game that starts small and easy to understand, but the more you cycle through it and replay it, the bigger it gets and the more complex it gets. And that's something that many games do, just like The Witness is focused on communication through puzzles, and that's something that many games do, but it comes different when you're focusing explicitly on it, right? And so I'm very interested to do that. So these are all sort of coming from different places. And I think if you're really comfortable with games and you think about games a lot, you come at them from many different angles and you have different kinds of ideas. So coming back to that question, it's just to say, just think about games a lot and in different ways and become comfortable with them. And you won't really have a problem having good ideas, I don't think. So now back to this part of the question, which was about, the game mechanics maybe being flexible vehicles to deliver some value outside the mechanics, right? You can definitely do that. I don't really like the word mechanics, but we won't go into that. That's why I have it in quotes. But the thing is that if you have this idea that I'm going to make a game that's about something, and then I'm going to figure out gameplay rules that make a game that's about the thing, but the message isn't the rules, the message is this other thing. You can definitely do that, but the rules and mechanics themselves have to be interesting enough for somebody to play. They have to be meaty enough that they want to engage with them. And because this is games, it's an interactive medium, those mechanics and what they cause to happen in the player's mind are a big part of what's being delivered to the player, right? Especially if it's a game that involves any skill. What they're going to be working on and improving at is this mechanical part. I mean, it's hard to imagine something that's not that way. Maybe there is such a thing. But so the point to be aware of is you could definitely do this, but it's not like the wrapper isn't also part of the payload. The wrapper is a major part of the payload and can't be separated from the other thing that you're trying to deliver. Another question. Do you worry about replay value in puzzle games? How do you extend a puzzle game's playtime to justify a purchase? Well, I don't think, okay. I think if you're asking this question, you're in a bad neighborhood already. So first of all, just don't even entertain ideas like extending the playtime because it'll make your game really boring. There are commercially successful games that are all about that, right? So a lot of these mobile micropayment games are just excuses for giving you bazillions of levels. But those games, you can't compete on the same play field with those games because they buy all their users to begin with, right? That's just not really a place you can go. And also, I just don't like to make games that are about wasting people's time exactly, right? I don't like to feed people's vices. I like to give them a new experience that could be mind expanding or entertaining in a positive way, right? And so what I say about this question is like, you really just want your game to have enough material in it to be interesting enough to last a long time, right? If it's really small, then maybe think about how the ideas that you started with can be bigger and more interesting and more expansive, right? So, and it's actually worse than that. You want to actually have so much material that you then cut the worst material and leave the best material, because that's how that's how the average value of your game goes up, right? If you just put in everything that you ever thought of and manage to implement, some of it's going to be good, some of it's going to be bad, and so the average quality is like kind of mediocre. But then, you know, it's like an object that's in the ocean or something. If you cut out the stuff on the bottom that's sinking it, it'll rise up a little bit, right? You want to be in a position to do that if you want to make a good game. And that means you need to actually have way more material than would justify a purchase, right? Now the thing is, that's actually not as hard as it seems, and we'll mention that, I guess, at the end. So another question: how do you add achievement value to solving randomly generated puzzles as opposed to handcrafted ones? And this is a very puzzle-specific question. But I think it applies also to non-puzzle games. I think this question is relevant to a lot of game types. The first thing I'll say is I don't know as it comes to puzzles exactly. It's not something that I try to do because I suspect it's very hard. There are some procedurally generated puzzle games that have come out recently. So there's a game called Dispontibus that went around a month or two ago. It generates puzzles that are hard, but it's not like I feel like a better person having solved them necessarily once I've done the first few. And so there's this difference between puzzle types. A classic example of a procedurally generated puzzle is something like Sudoku, right? It's just a very raw grid of numbers with some constraints. And you can feel like you're achieving things and making progress when you're early in learning how to solve Sudokus, right? You're having new observations of like patterns to look for or techniques to use. But after some point, that runs out. And you're like, well, I'm just doing puzzles over and over. And that's not necessarily bad. Like maybe that's just an interesting activity that you can do on the afternoon with a newspaper or something. People don't use newspapers anymore, but something like that. But you know, puzzles in The Witness, or generally the games that I do, my style is that the puzzles have an additional communication built in, and you're not just solving the puzzle, but you're getting this, at a meta level, you're getting this sequence of ideas that makes the puzzles interesting. And you can't really do that without hand authorship. So I suspect there is actually more that can be done. I'm not saying randomly generated puzzles can't be good, but I do think it's an area that can be actively researched. And so to go to the non-puzzle part of the question, you have a game like Spelunky here, where it's randomly generated. It's not really puzzles. It maybe borders on puzzles, though, because there are action puzzle-esque situations because the elements are so discrete, right? They're in a grid, and the rules are very clear. If there's an arrow trap, it's going to fire if something crosses the horizontal line where that arrow trap is. And so this is on the threshold of puzzle and action, and I think we don't understand games like this maybe as well as we should, and I think this would benefit from people really looking at it and thinking about it, and thinking about why random generation works so well here, and then how to bring that to other genres of games. So if anybody in the room is interested in that, go for it. It's a good area for research. Next question. You've always been advocating owning or building your own technology rather than depending on someone else's. Has that stance shifted given how seductive and powerful today's game development ecosystems and tools are in getting you up to good standards? And you know, they're just saying, well, Unity and Unreal are better now. So does that change your mind? And like, no, I'm a pretty obstinate person. Here's the thing though, most people here are students. So for my personal work, I don't use third-party game engines for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons is just that I like to build things technically. But there are also reasons about having control over your game and being able to implement your game at a high enough quality level. The thing is, if you're new at games, you don't face a lot of these problems. Like if you're new at games, your best course of action is just get something on the screen, right? And so I always say, hey, use a game engine for that. It's fine. Use Unity. It'll get you short-term progress. The thing to be aware of is you pay for that in the end, because toward the end of development, when you're really working on quality and making specific things happen, it's sometimes very hard to get the engine to do a specific thing that you want without then rewriting parts of it, which you may not even be able to do if you don't have a source license, right? The second thing I say about this is precision. So a game like The Witness, for example, the gameplay was pretty weird and subtle, and it only worked because we had a great deal of control over what was happening on the screen and in the interactivity, right? And so if the level of detail system was not something that we had programmed, if it was just a stock thing that we got, it probably would have broken some of the puzzles or made them less good, or it probably would have degraded the player's faith in, it's not exactly faith, but like feeling of being in good hands with regard to the kinds of puzzles we were throwing at them, right? And so even today, so we started The Witness in 2009 when pre-baked engines were not very good compared to today. Even today, I don't know if we were starting The Witness now if we could do it on Unity or Unreal, because some of the things are just too tweaky, like the lighting puzzle that I showed you. We had to be very careful to like have a pre-computed illumination system that would respond to things like doors opening and closing and crossfade between them. But when the door was closed, we needed to be able to make sure there was absolutely no light leak, like no white light could make it into the room at all, or the puzzle would break, right? And I don't know if you can do that in those engines without a great deal of suffering. So yeah. But again, as a younger person, you don't have that kind of problem unless you're very, very ambitious. So what I say is, use those engines, but have a long-term plan about how you're not going to be dependent upon them forever. Just keep developing skills outside there, whether you're a modeler, like learn how shader systems work in other things and not just Unity, right? If you're a programmer, just learn how engines work so that long-term you will have a broader skill set, let's say that. And also, I like building things. If you're gonna do things in the way that I'm talking about, where you master the technology instead of using an engine, I don't think that means you need to have programmed the whole thing yourself. I think it just means you need to be in control of it, right? So like both technically and business-wise. So technically, you need to know that if the way the shaders work isn't happening correctly for your game, you can go down and rewrite the shader system, right, to be whatever you want. Business-wise, you need to know, like 20 years from now, I'm going to be able to relaunch this game because I want it to be important to future people. And it needs to be able to play the same. And how am I going to do that if it's on an engine that's not supported anymore or whatever, right? So you need to have control of the game, and you need to be unafraid to change major things. Now, on the one hand, again, that's an advanced thing to worry about. On the other hand, just keep in mind, if you make games today, and you're not thinking about this, like they may not be playable in 20 years, right? Or probably won't be. And so it's a challenge to put together a life portfolio of your stuff. And that's something that we could solve better as people shepherding the entire medium. We should take that problem more seriously. Okay, last question. What advice do you have for developers who would like to design experimental games? And here's the thing, is being experimental is kind of hard because you get an idea for some new thing that you want to do, and you go make it happen, and it's just not that good in the beginning. That's how it always is, right? And when things are not that good, you're in a very difficult spot because if you're experimental enough, you can't really look at how other games did something like this, which is how mainstream designers often go, because you have nothing else that did the same experiment. So you're sort of out in the ocean in a rowboat with you don't know what direction to row. It's a very difficult situation. So the first thing is just be thorough. Make sure that you're really investigating your idea that you're experimenting with and looking at all the possible angles and really seeing all the ways that you could take it, because usually we don't, right? And the meta skill to develop, right? So this is a skill that you can work on at any particular instant in time. But the meta skill to be thinking about over the course of your entire life is that noticing what's interesting is a skill that you can work on and improve, right? And that's whether it's about your game or anything else, right? Because the thing is, human beings from day to day, so that we don't go completely insane, our minds filter out most of the information in front of us, right? So that we can categorize and deal with things as if they were very simple, right? But things are not that simple, they're very complex. And so there's this huge, massive flow of information that you're just not even perceiving all the time. And you can start to at least open that up a little bit when it comes to specific things that you're working on. And how do you build that skill? Well, I don't know. I mean, you just start looking at developing a taste for what's interesting. And I do this by looking at other genres, for example, like reading a book. And the older I get and the more experience I have, the more I'm just able to notice interesting things about it that I wouldn't have noticed before. Or listening to music. Music is very good for this, right? So the third thing, if you're going to be experimental, is you have to work hard, which is a little bit different from being thorough. This is just like spend a lot of time on it. Related but slightly different, right? And so the thing that I say about games like The Witness is we didn't ship The Witness. We shipped The Witness 4, as in the 4th sequel. And we just kept Witness 1, 2, and 3 in a closet where nobody saw it, right? We could have shipped Witness 1, 2, and 3 and tried to sell them to people. Probably they wouldn't have been nearly as good, right? And I don't think people would have been very excited about them because it's a weird idea. When you're going to start with a weird idea that people don't really recognize, it has to be good by the time it gets to them, or they're just going to be like, this is weird, I don't get it. I mean, a lot of people still said that with Witness. There are tons of like bad reviews for it on the internet. Not tons, but some. The ones that are negative are very negative. Yeah, like it's you can't just do an experiment and expect people to get it, right? Some people will not get it, and the number of people who get it or not is related to how hard you work to really make sure it's the best version of that thing, right? And then the last part is just because you have to spend a lot of time doing these things, just rest sometimes, meditate sometimes. And I don't even mean meditate in a way connected to any religious tradition or any trying really hard to do a specific thing, although that's good sometimes. For me, there are just certain classes of physical activity that let me turn off the part of my mind that, or not even turn off, but just let it rest, the part of my mind that's doing all this thinking about and solving problems. So dance is like that for me, although everybody's different. So find the thing that works for you. And so what's exciting about all of this is that today, games started in the 1950s or 1960s. They were very primitive. Today, games seem very, very sophisticated, and they are very sophisticated compared to that time. But compared to what games could be, I think it's very clear that we've explored only a tiny bit of the potential of the medium, and that's really exciting, right? And so for anybody starting out now, I just want to make the very clear point that you personally, are in a position where you can discover things that determine how games develop into the future. And that's what I have to say to people when they say, why should I be a weird experimental game person as opposed to like going to work at, Tencent or something? And it's like, well, you could actually help determine what video games actually are 10 years from now or 20 years from now. And maybe people in the future will not have such a good opportunity because it will have been decided. So use your opportunity well. And if that seems like too difficult or remote or hard to do, just remember, like it looks like this in the beginning. All you have to do is something like that, and it can turn into something good if you stick with it, if you notice what's important, and you're thorough, and you work hard. So that is all that I have for the main presentation. I'm hoping we have time for questions. Yeah? How do we want to run the questions? Do I pass the mic around or? Yeah, this guy over here raised his hand. Just stop me when it's enough time or something. Yeah.
Are you currently working on 2 projects at once? And if so, how do you manage your time?
there are two different ways of working on two projects at once. And one of them I have never been able to do. But the other one I do a lot, and it helps. So the one that is hard and that I can't do is like working on two serious projects that both have to happen. So like actually in the middle of Braid, I ran out of money to make the game, and I had to go work on other people's games to make money during the day, and then at night I'd be working on Braid. And that's very stressful and difficult, and your mind is bouncing back and forth between these things you have to do. And I quit doing that, and I borrowed money to finish the game because I felt like I was doing a bad job for the people I was working for, and I was doing a bad job on Braid, right? So I don't recommend that. But the part that really does work, I think, is to have a side project that I think is interesting, that I can turn to just whenever I want, when I want a break from the big project, you know? Because games, especially if they're ambitious or complicated, it just gets hard to just keep working on it for a long time. And so to have a break and go do something fun on the side is good, right? And then, but maybe that's not the main project. Maybe I know I have to ship this other game first. But then when I ship this other game, I feel good about having worked on this second thing, because now there's progress on something that I can pull over and pick up. So, yeah.
Hey, John, thanks for the talk.
Sure.
So just a question. If you were to release Braid like today, like
Yeah.
how would you like budget or market or get the word out for like a indie game like that?
I mean, that's a very... I mean, those are different questions, like budgeting and marketing and release. What's the most important part?
How would you get the word out?
How would I get the word out?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would just try. So I'm assuming that I would have been making this game in an environment where there like weren't that many time manipulation games and stuff. So I would again say, hey, this game, you know, the gameplay is really interesting. It would be a more difficult game to publicize today, I think, because you know, the game's press doesn't matter that much anymore. It's maybe more about streamers and YouTube. And a short game, so Braid, if you're, you know, if you're pretty good at puzzles and you play Braid, you can finish it in 4 or 5 hours. Some people take longer, but you know, it's not a giant game. And so games that don't have a long life like that are not that good for streamers and so forth. And so maybe it just wouldn't do as well today. But maybe it would, because sometimes small games come out. I don't know. So the thing is, though, whatever I say about Braid is not exactly right for anybody else's specific game, because it's a very, you know, if you go read The Art of War or something, it'll talk to you all about how terrain is super important, right? And so if you go ask Sun Tzu, how do you fight a battle? And he's like, well, I don't know. Is there a river over here? Like, is there a little mound? Like what? You have to tell me these things, and then I'll tell you what to do. And it's the same. Your particular game is very different from anybody else's. And what that means is you have to do that work of figuring out how to do it. Like somebody can tell you very general statements, but only you know the specific things about the game that are exciting or interesting or that'll get people to it. And so I regret that I cannot say more, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Can't wait for Jai.
We have 3 more minutes for maybe 2 more questions.
Okay. I'll try to make my answers faster.
Hi, thanks for being here. So you've talked a lot about not wasting the player's time.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen interesting criticism about The Witness, which I don't necessarily agree with, but it has like puzzles like that are like in Braid, where in Braid there's this cloud platform that's like a secret puzzle, and you have to wait a really long time for this cloud to get in the right place so you can jump on it.
Yeah.
So you've left it in there, you left it in The Witness, and so clearly you don't think it's wasting the player's time. So how do you juxtapose this idea of like it's a puzzle where you have to wait a long time, but it's not wasting the player's time?
Well, okay, so those criticisms are weird. Like I don't pay that much attention to what people write about the games, but I've seen a little bit of those. And those like The Witness has, you know, 600 or 700 puzzles in it, and to pick one out of this 100-hour game and say, this proves that the philosophy is not, you know, whatever. It's just a very weird, like that's a kind of tactic used by people who are trying to find problems, right? Firstly. And so I don't think that you can say very much about a large and complicated game by taking one, even the cloud in Braid, right? That said, no, neither of those things are about wasting the player's time. They are like, if you go into it with an attitude of being impatient and like, look, I just want to solve this puzzle and get like the score piece, then you feel like maybe it's a waste of time, right? But you know, the games that I do, they're not really about like serving the player all the time. It's not a subservient relationship of the game to the player. It's a little bit of like, look, here I have this thing to show you, and if you're not interested, just leave, right? But you know, I don't know. It's hard to explain in the time that we have, unfortunately, but yeah, it's just that those things are there to encourage a more meditative approach sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, so last question.
Hey, thank you. So when you're talking about the witness, right, it was a game about casting spells and drawing circles, right?
Yes.
But now witness is a game about surprise, right? So I assume like when you were making the demo of witnesses, you must find out like the game turns out is not what you want, so you change the game design in the middle way.
No, like what actually happened, so the spell casting version of the game, I actually started working on before Braid. And I decided that as a lone indie developer with no budget, it was going to be too big of a game for me to do. Especially at that, it was like 2003. Like, this was not a good thing to try and make. And it also, the gameplay idea wasn't working, because there were specific things about the shapes that you draw that were supposed to be interesting in an experimental way, and they weren't that interesting. It wasn't good gameplay, and I didn't know the answer. But then after Braid came out and it was successful, I said, oh, I have some money now that we could do a bigger project. Let me go back to that spellcasting game. But since it had been 4 years since I worked on it, it was a good time to question it and decide what to do instead. And that's part of why it ended up a different game. So it wasn't that game exactly, it didn't get very far through development before I realized it wasn't working, let me say. All right, are we good?
Yeah,
Thank you, everybody.
So you'll go next. I will set up the conversation. You only have like 3 slides, right?
Yeah, I only have 3 slides.
Okay, no worries. Hello. Hi, okay, next up we will have Nickole. Yeah, your slides are inside. Yeah, just
Thank you, John. That was one heck of a presentation over there. So I am Nickole, and I understand that many of you are probably fellow Singaporeans who are seeking to work in the games industry or probably have worked in the games industry already. So I'm going to share a little bit about a game dev journey from Singapore to Sweden, which is a kind of a strange story when you think about it. I always tell people this. In the game dev journey, I never asked to be here, which is kind of an odd thing to say, because there's a whole bunch of adventures along the way where things happen. But I didn't actually join the industry as a first choice, which people go, what? It's a passion industry. Everyone goes in as a first choice. And I was saying, well, no, actually, I followed the standard Asian path where someone goes, all right, you need to do science, you need to do engineering, law, whatever it may be. Okay, so I did science because, you know, I am okay with science. Biology is quite fun. That was good. So that's where I wound up in the National University of Singapore. Studied science, went in day one. The first thing I heard was like we had a welcome address. The dean said, you know, you do life sciences. That was back in 2005-ish. They were saying, oh, life sciences, there are a lot of people in this intake. We cannot really guarantee you that you're going to get a job in the industry. You might do something else. And I was thinking, that's strange. Why are we going into one thing and wind up doing something else? I was thinking, okay, maybe we should not be doing that. So I actually changed my course, wound up doing communications and new media. Because at the time I was thinking, what do I like to do with life? I didn't know that. That's why I said I didn't ask to be here, because I didn't actually know what I wanted. And at the time they were saying, oh, you know, there's this new course, communications, new media. They had some game courses. And I was thinking, game courses, I like playing video games, so I should do games courses. Now, at that point, I still have not thought about joining the games industry. I was just like, this is fun. I can get a degree out of this. That's a nice deal. So that's great. After studying it for a while, I realized there's a slight problem. I realized that the games industry actually wants people who have experience in the games industry. And since I was in the university, I had no experience in the games industry, which was not a great combination. So I was thinking, we will now get an internship. Because internships are great. You can gain some experience and do all that. But at the time, the NUS did not have a single games company. So I was thinking, oh my goodness, this is terrible. There's no way I can get games experience. So the first game company I could think of, I was like, which companies exist in Singapore? Okay, there was EA. So Electronic Arts at the time was doing game development in Singapore, and I was saying, let's get an internship with EA. And it turns out that Chris Thompson, the vice president at the time, he was running a show, and I was thinking, I could get his email address, that's great. So I actually sent an email to Chris Thompson and said, I want an internship with EA as a games designer. And he said, all right, well, come in for an interview, and then we'll go for that. Remember, at the time, the company did not actually have a listing with the NUS, so I was just kind of gambling at this point. And went in, EA offered a biz dev position to me. And I was saying, look, guys, I asked for a game design position, and you gave me a biz dev. And I was saying, no, I'm not taking that one. Which was weird, because like games company and all that, it could have worked out. Wonder what that would have been like. And then, later on, I encountered the MCYS, because they were going, Youth Olympic Games, we are going to make a website game. And I was thinking, I'm a bit scared of that at the time, 2005, kind of scary. So I was saying, no, I'm not going to do that one. And then I heard about Gambit, which is the Singapore MIT Gambit Game Alliance. Basically, we take ideas from MIT, try development into games that we can actually monetize. And that worked out quite well. So that's actually the first step over here in Carnival Showtime. And I've met a whole bunch of fellows over here from the Gambit program. So that was really nice. First experience, it was kind of rocky. Need to learn to work with a team. Need to learn, some features you have, some features you cut. There's a bunch of stuff we worked on that didn't make it to the final shape page, but that's okay. That's something that you will have in your own game dev journey. After that, I was working with my professor. We were doing serious games research, trying to figure out how to teach people, using games. Early days of education in games, and you'll say, that's... it's kind of interesting. I actually went to Kentucky to present a paper, which was totally random, because the professor didn't have time. Okay, let's go to Kentucky and present a paper. Then after that, I was thinking, okay, how do I actually get into the games industry? Going to graduate, how to get in the games industry? I didn't have the answer to that. So again, I gambled, and this time what happened was I said, okay, game companies need portfolio. I don't have portfolio, so let me just go to a random game which I like, Heroes of Might and Magic, take a random game editor, which is basically a map editor, make a map and call it portfolio. So that was basically the extent of how things worked back then. And I actually sent a portfolio to Ubisoft Singapore. Now, that was another strange one, because what happened in Ubisoft was, got the interview, they said, hey, you want to work with the company? And I said, I'm helping my professor half-time. Can I do part-time with you guys? And then those guys were like, well, all right, we'll call you back. So imagine that I didn't know what was going on at the time. 2 weeks later, they called me and said, can you do full-time? I said, I'll negotiate with my professor. We'll figure things out. So that's basically how I got started in, professionally in AAA. But the strange thing was this. My boss came to me and he said, do you know how dangerous it was, the thing that you just did? I was like, I have no idea. What? And then he was saying, we could have given your job to someone else. You don't just say, wait on a job. And I was saying, oh, wow, I didn't know that. That's extremely dangerous. But hey, I'm here. So why do you pick me and not someone else? He said, because, well, you've got an internship, no one else had it at the time. So that's a little bit of a nugget down there. I'll recommend that if you all want to work in the industry, at the very least, get some kind of experience. If you're not developing your own products, try to get an internship somewhere. Just ultimately get hands-on, work with games, have something on your portfolio. Because right now, as you can see here, this crowd is a lot larger than it would have been back when I joined the industry over 10 years ago. And you've got competition right now. So that's one of those things to think about. Now, at the time, I actually joined the project, and he was saying, oh, there's a shooter game you're developing. And that shooter game turned out to be Ghost Recon Phantoms, which was this wonderful thing over here. Free to play, and it's a shooter game. And he handed me this really big Excel spreadsheet. And the Excel spreadsheet was like full of numbers. I was like, oh boy, what is this thing? And then he said, oh, this is a weapon system for Ghost Recon, and I would like you to help input the data into the system. And I was thinking, okay, newcomer to the industry, I could do that, except for one slight problem. Number one, I'm lazy, and number two, I don't know Excel. So of course I told him I know that I can do the job. So I took over the whole spreadsheet, and the first thought was, oh boy, how do you work this thing? The numbers are everywhere. You punch them in one by one. It was horrendous. Then the first thing I did after that was just find formulas and try to just pump out those numbers as easily and quickly as possible. So I don't actually have to do any manual work because I'm that lazy. And it turns out that worked out really well because I automated the spreadsheet to the point that he didn't know what's going on in the spreadsheet anymore. And he was saying, do you want to take over the combat system? And I was saying, cool, I'll take care of the combat system. So from not knowing Excel to working with Excel. There's a bit of a lesson there where you just go, say yes first, figure out later, make sure you do it well. It's kind of a little tricky, but it's something to figure out. And that actually turned out quite useful because later on, we were going on Steam. So Ghost Recon was going on Steam, and we actually had to populate a whole bunch of data. And I was looking at that and going, your tools are problematic. We had some trouble putting things in because the tool was either crashing or lagging, or basically it wasn't working so well. Tooling is extremely important in game development, and if you have a bad tool, you slow your iteration rates, you are unable to make your changes as quickly as you need to. You cannot actually see where your problems are and where you're trending with your product. So the thing I did was I actually took the Excel spreadsheet, punched out all the numbers into CSV because I knew that the server, the SQL server, was actually able to take CSV as an input. So the short of it is we were able to import all the data from the spreadsheet into the server in a single move. So because of that particular change, we were suddenly able to take days, literally days of work, and put it into minutes. And that's days of work per weapon, which means that we actually, I originally told the team we'll probably take weeks to get all the stuff done in time for Steam. And then later on, I was saying, oh, we're done in 3 days. So I was like, what? But that's because when you have your tooling and you're looking at your workflows and you realize that, hey, you can actually do the same stuff but in a slightly smarter way and probably with a bit of laziness involved, you are able to go for that. And that's where, the little thing that's still in development right now with Ubisoft, Skull and Bones. That was the next project after we went on Steam. And I was looking at Skull and Bones, and we had some really nice ways to manage the data. And I cannot go too much into detail because of the ongoing project and NDA and all that, but there were a lot of ways we could just manage that data. And this is why I'm always talking about data management, where you think about how are all the structures set up, whether there's any commonality you have in terms of managing it, and how do you optimize your inputs to make sure that you're able to keep your iteration rates up. Now, after a couple of years on Skull and Bones, I was going, probably want to have a little bit of a change from working in AAA. And then my friend Travis, he was working on Autumn at the time, and then there was a sequel in development, and I was thinking, it sounds like a great idea. So left the company, Ubisoft. I didn't have a plan actually or a job lined up. I didn't even have a job guaranteed with him. I was just like, let's just go try it out. So it was not a gamble. And at that point, we wound up working on his project. It's still ongoing at the moment. But it was a good break because, I started from indie with Carnival Showtime, wound up working with AAA, free-to-play, and after that, realizing, hey, there's the monetization mechanics, and then just having a refresher course in indie development where you say, okay, this is how you would set up the gameplay and make the game compelling. because one of the most important things in gameplay is what you say, it's not so much about how graphically intensive your game is. Is as John mentioned, it's just, you need to have a game that actually fascinates your players. Thinking in terms of money is always a little bit dangerous, because when you say, okay, I'm going to make something worth millions of dollars, the slight problem is if it costs you millions of dollars to make, you have to sell enough to make back those millions of dollars. So that's one of those things about large scale that has its own issues. But working with indie is kind of a refresher, saying we know we can do it with a much smaller budget and still make something really, really exciting for the players. Along the way, I got a call from a recruiter, which was really, really interesting, because the recruiter said, hey, there's this company in Sweden, Stockholm. Do you want to interview with them? I was saying, okay, what do they do? And he was like, oh, you know, it's a game engine and stuff. All right, cool. Went for the interview, flew me over to Stockholm, and that company was basically Frostbite. It was not EA DICE. Frostbite did the interview, seemed to be okay, seemed to mesh with the team. And then I got a call days later saying, I'm sorry, we're not taking you. I was like, oh man, you know, come all the way out here. I thought things were pretty much set. A week later, same recruiter called and said, there is a company in Stockholm that would like to interview you. And I was thinking, oh man, look, I just did that. You know? And then it turns out, oh, that company was EA DICE. So that's basically the story of how I wound up working with EA DICE. And one of the interesting things is that visas take a while. So the visa in this case was going to take a couple of months, and they were saying, okay, maybe work in the EA Singapore office for a while, and then we'll like move you over when the visa is set up. And the first project I wound up working on with DICE was Star Wars Battlefront. I don't know if you all have heard the controversy around that particular product. So one of the fun things was I joined the team and was there right when, well, just right before everything blew up with the loot boxes. So it was quite an experience, but it gives you an idea of like how quickly things move, because when you're within the project, you're developing stuff. We just launched and we're thinking, all right, we're pretty much set. We should be all right. And then next thing you know, you hear about this thing on Reddit and you go, oh, that's kind of strange. And just the next day you go, that's the most hated post on Reddit. Oh boy. Yeah, things evolve really quickly. And after Battlefront, I wound up working on Battlefield 5. And then there was another great big spot of controversy over there. So being between those two, you realize that the games industry has its own risks and it has its rewards. We all see it as a passion industry. We all love games. We all love making games. But one of the strange things I wind up telling people nowadays is like, after this journey, seeing indie, seeing AAA and all that, one of my conclusions is maybe we should stop making games. And people go, my goodness, man, you guys are crazy. Are you saying that we stop making video games? I'm not saying we stop making video games. I'm saying that there is a space right now where there is the game, right? Game is where people think in terms of Battlefield, Battlefront, AAA, big budget titles, you know, even with mobile microtransactions, money making, it's a particular space. And then you've got the space over on the other side called apps, where you're making a whole bunch of applications. They're programs, they have users, they're platforms. They also can make money, but they are usually not extensively gamified. And there's somewhere in between, there's a space that I find I don't have a name for just yet, but that space is the union between games and everything else. And what I'm talking about in this particular case is where you say, okay, we have a game like Journey by that game company. It's kind of it's a meditative experience, right? And at the same time, it's not something that's big budget. You don't need extensive monetization tools that will allow you to fund such a project. And it's something in there, but if you call it a game, people have certain expectations. The term game is quite a loaded word. So when people are pondering that, they'll say, oh, I have certain expectations, maybe there are microtransactions, do I need to pay the box price, and so on and so forth. But when someone is running an app, they usually don't have these kinds of concerns. So there is something in between there which doesn't have a name just yet, but that I think that we as game developers would be able to tap into. And in Stockholm, because I go to the Stockholm Tech Meetup, and we're seeing companies coming together saying, hey, we want to have this tech, med tech, but we want people who can gamify this. We have this other thing out there in the north in Sweden. We're investing in that, and we're like game companies to come in. So there is this union that I've been seeing between the game companies, the skills that we have in gamification, in monetization, and so on, and there is other technological spaces which, when you make that together, you actually have something that you could call it an app, but it's not really an app. You could call it a game, but it's not really a game. But it's also not a gamified app. It's something else entirely. One of the things that we need to know about games is that the very core of games is actually education. We are making a product that actually teaches people how to do something. In a shooter game, it teaches you the hand-eye coordination, maybe a little bit of target identification. You can figure a few of those things out, and you repeat that so you get really, really good at it, which is why we have esports today. We have a whole bunch of activities where it requires people who are highly skilled and calibrated towards those actions. But at the same time, we also see the effects of games like Assassin's Creed, where you say, oh man, Notre Dame basically caught fire, and you say, well, we actually have 3D scans of these things. And there are people who have learned from games about things in the real world. So games actually have been serving their purpose of education, but at the same time, if we are making a product that is only branded as a game, the imagination of people who use it winds up a little limited by what they actually see, what they actually understand of the term game. So that's why along the path of the game dev journey, I was just thinking, what if we actually had something that we developed that is quite different from anything else the world understands, but it's not something different from what the world has seen. It's actually a branding issue. So why I started pondering that is really about the question of budgets and monetization. Because where you need to have a monetization mechanic that comes together and funds your product, you're thinking big budget. What if it's small? What if it starts small and it grows big from there? Organic growth. So like any journey that starts from a small place, that's pretty much the conclusion I have. It's really more of a question and something that you guys might want to ponder. So yeah. And that will be that. Do we have any time for questions at the moment? So we probably have time for a few questions. Is there a microphone available? Okay. Does anyone have a...
So you're currently a systems designer?
Yes,
So
I am.
what do you do currently, and what skills do you carry over from your different jobs in the different games?
So I would say that, in short, a systems designer is someone who takes ideas from someone's head, puts it into actionable numbers and systems, and makes it something that you can implement into a game. So that's the gist of what we do. Which means that there's a degree of versatility here, which is we can do combat systems, we can do monetization systems, we can even talk about workflows, which is right now one of the things which I'm kind of harping on in the company, because even though I work primarily on gameplay systems and monetization and things like that, the first thing that I'm always pondering is how can you do whatever you do in a more efficient way? So that is to take the overview of a system and say, okay, I can do this in 10 steps, but if I were to skip these steps in between, I can get the same accurate results in maybe 3 steps, right? So it's really about thinking in terms of, okay, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing what we want to do, and these are the likely degrees of freedom that we expect to have. So the job of the systems designer is really to think that, okay, you guys probably want to explore these 20 options. You currently have this tool. This tool is maybe too specialized. It only allows you to explore 2 of those options. What is the simplest solution that you can come up with that allows you to go through all of those? And that's basically what I would say that I do.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Do you have questions?
Hi, thanks for the talk. I'm wondering, since you've worked both locally as well as like in Sweden, right?
Yes.
Are there any differences in the industry that you see between the two countries, and anything you think either side could learn from each other?
I would think that there's a very large difference in terms of work culture between Singapore and Sweden. So in terms of work-life balance, Sweden really values it quite a lot. And in terms of employee protections, there's also quite a range over there. And there's also some advantages you have in Singapore, and that is that people are very willing to push in areas where you say, okay, I'm not sure what kinds of resources we'll have available. There's a willingness to operate in that particular vacuum. So between the two, I would say that Singapore actually has a very industrious work culture, which means that there's a receptivity to working for pretty long hours, as well as some pretty grueling pushes. But it exists to a lesser extent in the Swedish work culture. However, that's not to say that there isn't a startup culture over there in Stockholm, for example, which kind of is a blend between the two of them. And in fact, in some companies, that attitude has also been carried over, because one of the big things that no one really thinks about is that there's actually unionization in Sweden. So that means that even though there isn't an official game dev union per se, there are unions that actually take care of the labor conditions for the workers. And one of the very interesting things is that actually gives you options. And those options include, if you're to say you are carrying out experiments on your own after hours, that extra energy can be put towards building stuff and improving your skills as well. So this is one of the main differences, because in Singapore, the employer would expect you to be fully invested on the company itself. And that may narrow your options, but depending on how you play it and depending on your employer, things do change. I mean, in Singapore, I would say that because I worked with Ubisoft, it's kind of an MNC. You're also having other MNCs in Singapore. The differences between and ultimately is to make sure that you find a good fit for yourself between what you expect out of your life, what you want to achieve, and what the company's work culture actually allows you to accomplish. Because when you have the alignment, you actually can go very, very far. And that would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have one more question? Sure. One more question? No? Okay, then we'll wrap up.
Okay, well, thank you all.
Okay, so next up we have Kim. Right, just to the next slide. You want to go back to the left one? Yep.
Wow. It's a Saturday and this room is full. Serious game developers, yeah? Okay, so hi, my name is Kim, and I'm the co-founder of Landshark Games. We are an indie games company here in Singapore. And according to Gwen, we have been alive for the last almost decade, but counting the years, it's about 9 years exactly, but it's a long time. So let me have a quick introduction of myself. I have my notes here, so, okay. So my background. Now, to be honest, I got a little distracted in this slide because I started to put games that I love to play on this slide, and that's kind of a mistake. But this is a good way to show my love for games. So these are games like Pong, and the latest games that I play, Overcooked, is fantastic. But I've always loved games, and I've been fascinated with art and tech. And so I left Singapore after Temasek Poly, and graduated in the US actually, and worked and lived there for a while. And then I moved to Auckland, New Zealand, and started my own independent web consultancy, had my first child, important thing. Moved back to Singapore in 2008, had another child, and then started Landshark Games. So this is my life in short, but as you can see, I dated myself. So let's move on. Okay, so Landshark Games. So these are the games that we make. They're mostly casual games and for mobile. And one thing to note that we are not an overnight success, and that we strive to make engaging games with broad appeal, and our emphasis is on our IPs. So one of our most recent IPs, Zen Koi, has been relatively successful. But not to forget, several years before that, we've also made Aviator, and it's a Flash game. Everybody knows what Flash is. So in the last 9 years, we've created 4 games, right? So I guess you can do the math. We take about 2 and a bit years to make a game. And it's not fast nor slow, I guess. You could say that we are a little slow cooking in our games. But I think the question is, how did we survive so long with such a long development cycle? So before I dwell on our trials and errors for the last 9 years, let me share with you why we choose to make games. So Paul and I love to play games. Now Paul, as a lot of you know, is sitting right there. And he's my partner in crime. And all the ideas and all the production of the games with our team, we do it all together, right? So we share fond memories and experiences of playing our favorite games. But we also believe that games should be accessible to everybody, and that games should tell a story. And no doubt, we should have the joy in playing games. We believe in designing amazing experience for people to interact with. I think this is high in our priority whenever we start a game project. We try to imagine as hard as we can how the experience is for the game, as opposed to the game mechanic. But I think that sets us a little apart from how we do things. And most of all, we are introverted entertainers. I think we are toy makers, we are entertainers. I think to see ourselves as entertainers is kind of a different perspective. I think we're both pretty introverted. I do not like standing here talking to so many people. But what drives us to create games is that we get to be on this global stage, and that we could deliver and craft our ideas, and people could play these games, and we could share that with them. So, the topic, how did we survive 9 years of indie games development? So there's so much to share. I hope I can finish in 20 minutes. Let's try. Okay, 3 hearts. Okay, so for the first 2 years, so it's 2010, and we are in our mid to late careers. So both Paul and I have been working for the last decade since then. It's a long time. So at the time, Paul decides to leave his job at a games company after 2 years. So while Paul was looking for his next job, and I was doing contract work and also a stay-at-home mom, we decided to set a challenge for ourselves. We said, right, can we do a project together? Try something different. And we decided that since we have complementary skills, Paul he specializes in coding, and I in art and design. So we decided that we should work on a project together. And Aviator was the result of that. So these next few slides, or many slides after this, is going to be kind of our quick observation and some of the learnings that we had over the years. So first thing up, Business 101, setting up shop. I know a lot of you are students here, so this may not be like the top of your priority. But I think if you do think about setting up a shop and making games and having a little bit of longevity in your making games, registering a business is important. So this will help you also towards getting grants and funding. So setting it up early is actually quite good. Now, we did not set it up right from the start. We actually had our game ideas and work on our game project first before we incorporate our business. but ultimately it's an important task to do. So next, finding an accountant. Yippee, nobody wants to deal with numbers, especially us. So finding an accountant was easy peasy, just look through the classified ads or what's equivalent of a classified ad. But I'm sure nowadays there are a lot of services out there. Do look out for services out there that's all-encompassing, that would get you, your business quickly set up, and they are low cost. So we found our accountant through classified ad, and she's called AA Accountancy, right at the top, and we just closed our eyes and picked one. That's how you get started. Okay, and we're still using her, so it's good. So all about the game. So with some pre-visualization of Aviator, Paul started pitching the game idea. So we managed to secure funding from MDA and also funding from small investors that we use as revenue share agreement with them. So then the question next is whether we self-publish or we find a publisher. So about a year and a half later, we decided to self-publish on Facebook. We didn't have a publisher prior to launch. So legal and negotiations. So this is, again, one of those things when you start a company or decide that you're going to do serious gaming and you're going to make your own game, that getting set up in legal is important. So when we started out, we didn't have dedicated lawyers. We wrestled with contracts ourselves. We basically modified, took templates, and tried to figure it out ourselves. But however, the situation comes when we had Lockheed Martin, the giant American warplane manufacturer, sent us a cease and desist letter, and that's where we found a lawyer. Very, very important, because that we have used, the situation was that we have used some of the names in Aviator the game, and therefore we are not allowed to use that, as we realize now, and therefore it was great that we had a lawyer. So what we did was we got some contacts from our friends, find ourselves a lawyer, a legit one, and we get ourselves sorted, and the lawyers had to just send a response, and the problem went away. So lawyers are good. So funding. If you are pursuing funding, even from friends and family, you need to get set up with contracts. It took a long time and effort, but it's worth keeping the understanding clear and transparent. Because when you have a contract, there's a level of trust that when it comes across. Like, level of trust is important, as it also shows the level of integrity. So that's a very important thing if you choose to seek funding. So choosing distribution platforms. For us, we chose Facebook to start, and that was, of course, 2010 then. And Facebook has been started for the past few years by then. And but what happened was that for Facebook, they were encouraging players like us, game developers like us to make games on their platform. And so it was a natural fit, because we were making our games on Flash, and that Facebook were offering promotion for developers. And therefore, we jumped on board, and we incorporated their Facebook credits, which went well. And what happened with that was that it gives us our first feature on the Facebook game platform, and that gave us some audience. So our first feature, first revenue. So that's exciting. So that part was really great. And when we first got our first feature, I mean, both of us just looked at each other in the eye. We had 30,000 players per day. What do we do with this? So the problem with that is that when we first had our first feature, we were not quite equipped. Our systems were crashing, and we were fighting fires, and there's just the two of us, and we had a electrical outage. Our computers was rendered, can't work, and we go, oh no, what do we do? But so we had lots to fix in the game, and we realized that with the first feature, it showed us our flaws, our gap in what was wrong with the game. But the good thing was we did have one whole month of feature. The good thing too is that we put analytics in the game, so we had some idea of what's wrong with the game, and that helped us fix some of the bugs in the game. So after our first month of feature, we caught the attention of Six Waves, which is the Hong Kong publisher. And what happened with Six Waves is that they were very keen to sign us on. They saw the potential in Aviator, and we were a little desperate. We were going, okay, shoot, there's a lot to fix in this game, and we wanted to get it fixed. And we thought that signing with a publisher would give us a little bit more time. So we did. We signed with Six Waves, and we relaunched Aviator after a few months of just making changes, figuring out now that we've got audience, we know how they play, and then we decided to fix some of the game design issues. So the first 2 years with Six Waves brought us good revenue. So that was fantastic. So we figured, well, all right, so I think we're sustainable. I think we can manage this for a little while. We can get this going. So let's hire. So we decided to staff up a little bit, start working on Aviator updates and a little new title as well. So next 3 years. So after Aviator, with Aviator, we actually achieved about 3.5 million installs, and we had a great player base. However, after a while, internally, we're a little bit burnt out from content-heavy game. We released with 3 continents of story, but our players blast through it for like, I don't know, 2 months or 2 weeks, and we go, what do we do now? So we decided that the best thing to do was to keep going and to release more content for the game. But unfortunately, that was a little time-consuming, and we didn't scope our work very well. But eventually, it did got released, but we were pretty burned out by then. So we thought, well, okay, the next game we'll just make a simple puzzle game, okay? So let's do that and see what happens. So at that time, we actually have more than one puzzle game idea. So we actually had Zen Koi, which is now Zen Koi, the idea. But we decided to release Bad Candy first, because we thought that, okay, it's a simple enough game. We can figure out what's the audience. Maybe we can cross-promote some of the Aviator audience across as well to play the new puzzle game. But that didn't turn out quite well because the genre between the 2 games were pretty different. So Aviator was a strategy trading game, and Bad Candy was kind of a Minesweeper-esque game, and that didn't synergize. So we technically have a failure at hand. We launched Bad Candy 2013, and then we lost a life, basically. We have a failed product. So that was a bit tough. We didn't know what to do with failed product. Aviator kind of was, it's not quite a hit. It gave us some revenue, so we didn't quite know what to do with it. But then what happened was that we struggled with the development of Zen Koi as well. So we faced another challenge, which is changing platform. As you know, we started with Flash, and that was a web platform. And we now have to switch to mobile platform because the world is moving on. So we had to figure out how to switch gear, basically. So instead, unfortunately, at that time, instead of pivoting to a new technology like Unity, we stuck with Flash for a little while. So now the dreaded feeling of not knowing what we're going to do, it's pretty nagging. And on top of that, we have declining revenue. So the only game that's giving us revenue right now is Aviator. And it's been running for more than 2 years now. So that's getting a little desperate. So with no publisher in sight, we have nothing for Zen Koi. We have no publisher to publish Zen Koi. But as well with a publisher for Aviator, we also do not have visibility, and we couldn't project our revenue very well. So until it's a bit too late, we couldn't plan. So more fear and uncertainty. Failure to sustain the business. So this is getting pretty sad. So after 2015, almost one and a half years of developing Zen Koi, and before the launch of Zen Koi, we were technically out of money. So we had to talk to our staff about the situation, and it's a very hard thing for us, but we had to let most of them go. So then the next 4 years. So at this point, letting go of our staff, it went back down to pretty much Paul and I, and morale was pretty low by then. And we thought really hard about what we should do. Should we continue? What we should do with the game. Doesn't quite look like a game yet. We didn't understand how we can, or we couldn't figure out how to market Zen Koi as well, because Zen Koi was a very different kind of game. It wasn't your typical game. I don't even know how to say. It's an experiential game, I would say, if I would have to call it. And now the category under relaxing game. And but we have to forge on. We decided there's nothing to lose because we have taken investment from people. We said, yes, we have to launch this. And so we press the launch button and we go, yes, okay, let's launch. So in spite of it all, we decided to let it loose. So we launched with a minimum viable product. So this is quite a technical term, but for us, when we launched, we understood that Zen Koi wasn't a finished product, wasn't a complete product. It has all the features that it needed to play. So this is a note to self, actually. It's like, don't sweat the small stuff. I guess, I mean, Paul and I are pretty detail-oriented people, and especially for those who have worked with us. But I think we should take the time still to make sure that we pay attention to details in games. And I think that's one of the stuff that made Zen Koi and all the games that we've made with high ratings. And I think paying attention to small stuff, the key is to prioritize what are the important things that you want fixed, want to feature, but don't drive yourself insane. So maintaining a business, I think from now, for us, at this point of time, how many years on? 6 years, I think. We decided with self-publishing, died a few times, and we decided that we need to keep relationship with our distributors, and especially with tool and content publishers like Unity, and that's important. So with Zen Koi, what we have done is that we have time-released content, so we keep giving players new patterns to play with, and that seems to be keeping them happy and giving us revenue as well. So, and that helps because cash flow is important in business. So as you grow your business past the 5 years, you realize that in order to keep a staff, you need to have cash flow. But if it's just yourself, it's fine. But technically, if you want a studio, a team, cash flow is very important. So, and savings, government do play a good part. We have saved a lot of money with, PIC, for those locally. It's a, government grant that they give to businesses, small businesses. And if you live in wherever you are in Malaysia, do seek out those grants as well, because I'm sure there's some funding there and grants as well for that. So these are the 3 points that I felt, or we felt, that make self-publishing work, and we have been successful with this, this whole idea of self-publishing. So viral features are built into the game. Players can share, Players can share some of the koi that they've ascended. For those who don't know, you ascend koi to dragons. That's a short form of it in the game. But the glory is that you display the ascension, because it does take a long time to ascend a koi. And then support for players as well. We have built-in support for players. They chat to us like old friends. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. But it does help with ratings, because they could take a 1-star review to a 5-star review. So analytics is, again, important. Now, this is a very deep, analytics, you could have a whole topic on it, but basically any form of analytics is good. Gives you an idea how players are reacting to your game and playing your game. So with Zen Koi, we had kind of unexpected success, which is great. So we managed to make meaningful connections with our distribution partners, and keeping that relationship is great. And since then, Zen Koi and Zen Koi 2 reached 10 million installs on Play Store itself. And so there's a little bit of rainbow at the end of that. But this is the reach that Zen Koi has, and it just makes me really happy whenever I look at this, because people are really playing our game, and that they hashtag Zen Koi game and sharing it. And we have followers. We have people who actually play our game, and people who like playing our game, and it's great. And so sustainability. So from here onwards, basically we want to prolong our lifeline. And in the short of it, profitability is important. Having enough money is important. Money buys us time, and both are good resources, basically. So when you want to continue to make games for as long as we did, you have to also buffer for the fact that you may have a failed product in between. So as you continue to show the care and development in games, we also must make sure that we have the courage to face possible failure. But be bold, and our creative endeavors are, but mostly be compassionate. I think that's one of my favorite words, I think, to be compassionate not only to others, but to yourself. Because I think sometimes making a game is a grueling process, so don't let it get to you. Make sure that you take care of yourself as well. So ideal versus business. Our challenges ahead. So we are creators. We still need to continuously strive to strike a balance between what is ideal creatively and also as business, as you can see, in order to stay alive for so long. So hopefully you give us a runway to continue to make more games. And last of all, gratitude. I think for us, Paul and I, we're really happy and thankful that we're still in business for so long. And we hope to do more in time to come. Thank you. That's it. Right. Questions?
Thanks.
You're next.
Hi. In your talk, you have started with a publisher and then move on to becoming self-publishing, right? So I want to ask is like, how important are publishers to indie companies in current times?
Good question. I think if you are starting out, a publisher is great because they give you advice on how to make your game better, and they have the resources to market your game and all that. Of course, the downside is that you have to sacrifice quite a large chunk of your revenue. But I think it's good for us. I think for Aviator, 6 Waves, I must say, have been pretty kind to us. Aside from the transparency of our revenue, it's hard for us to manage our business. Other parts is great. I mean, I think it gives us some audience. It gives us an idea what kind of audience our games fetch. So I think overall, if you're starting out, publishers is good. But I think times have changed. I mean, in the last decade, you could self-publish anytime now. But I think to give you a good start, perhaps a publisher. But again, really depends, I think, where you're at.
Thank you for the presentation. My question would be, what would you say are the positive sides on working in indie studio instead of AAA?
Studio instead of AAA?
Yes.
Is that right? I think indie studio, well, Paul and I came from AAA companies. I think politics is one of the hard bits about AAA. Unless you thrive in it, then maybe it's all right. But I think we were at that stage where we wanted to be independent, independent for time reasons. We have 2 young children, so that's an important part of the equation. And financial independence as well, that's the other. But that, again, that depends on whether your game was successful or not. So lucky for us, it has been all right. So we can sustain ourselves and we can be happy making games. I think both of us love to create stuff. So I think that's a good balance in having your cake and eat it, if you can say it. Like, you know, be great creators, take the time to create, and still be able to, you know,